Welcome back. Thank you for staying with us. Now, today marks the third day into the 16 days of an international campaign for the elimination of violence against women. The annual event, dubbed 16 Days Activism Against Gender-Based Violence, began on November 25th and will run until December 10th. During the period, activists take time to galvanize action to end violence against women and girls around the world. The international campaign originated from the first Women's Global Leadership Institute, coordinated by the Center for Women's Global Leadership in 1991. And for purposes of this conversation, we are very excited to have Pete Walls. He's the head of Department for International Development at the British High Commission. We also have Ms. Tabitha Sawyer. She's the Deputy Executive Director, Kellen, but she's also a lawyer. It's also important that I mentioned that we were expecting to have Ms. Florence Machio from Equality Now and Dina Musinda Ruezo as well, who's the Executive Director from Femnet. The last two have not been able to make it ahead. There's crazy traffic in Nairobi right now. But all the same, let's have this conversation. Ms. Sawyer, let me begin with you. And the question that a lot of Kenyans were asking the minute you said you're going to have this conversation is, first of all, let's talk about these 16 days of activism and paint the picture of gender-based violence for us, especially in Kenya.
Thank you so much, Linda. So 16 days of activism is an annual event that is meant to collaborate and meant to celebrate and meant to bring out and highlight issues of sexual and gender-based violence. Now, if I could paint a picture for you, if you look at the statistics that we have in Kenya, this guides the conversation in terms of why this 16 days of activism is quite important in Kenya. We have numerous reported cases of sexual and gender-based violence. A lot of those are obviously happening to young women and girls as compared to the males. And we also have a lot of issues to do with domestic violence, issues to do with child marriage, issues generally that can be classified as gender-based violence, which we need to highlight. This year's 16 days of activism focuses, particularly for today's conversations, on the girl child and especially the children, and the need for us to keep them safe at the home spaces, at the community level, and at the schools.
Okay, just girl child. This has nothing to do with the boy child. This has nothing to do with the men out there.
Certainly, it has everything to do with the boy child as well, but Linda, we do appreciate that there's an unnecessary unfair burden that rests on the girl child. So for instance, if you look at, say, the police annual crime statistics, it shows you that on average we have about 2,000 young girls who would be reported as being either defiled or raped, as compared to, say, about 100 cases that are reported on sodomy. So while the focus is on both sexes, there's a particular focus based on the fact that the girl child has an unfair disadvantage when it comes to sexual violence. So this does not necessarily mean that we're excluding the boy child.
But this is where you come into this conversation. First of all, you clearly have worked a little bit on international development at the British High Commission. Let's talk about the scale of the problem and the vulnerable individuals in terms of gender-based violence from where you stand and probably from the kind of work you've been doing around the country.
Thank you, Linda, and thanks for inviting me on the show. I think for me, I think this is an issue that matters for all of us, wherever we are, at any level of society. I think of this in three ways. I think largely it's at a global level. This is what this 16 days is about. I think actually it should be 365 days. That this is something that really matters for both morally and for women and girls around the world. And that's what this is about, and that's why the UN Secretary General has called violence against women and girls a rupture of human rights. Professionally, I've seen this around in Kenya and across Africa and around the world, and I've met women and girls who've been victims of sexual violence, and I think it is unacceptable. And from a very personal perspective, I'm a father, I'm a husband, I'm a son, and I'm a brother for four amazing women and girls in my life. And I think of them every time that I think about what this means and the hopes and opportunities that they all have had and continue to have.
Ms. Sawyer, If someone was to ask you to define gender-based violence, because someone would be like, if someone hits you, if someone insults you, probably if someone is raped, female genital mutilation is part of this. For our viewers who don't really understand what is involved in all this, how would you define gender-based violence? What is it exactly? So that people out there know and they watch out for it.
Let me perhaps approach the issue on a two-pronged way of answering.
Okay.
There is the illusion that we have as a society that when we talk about sexual and gender-based violence, that we're only talking about rape.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
So this is one of the things that we need to debunk and demystify to anyone who is watching, that when we talk about sexual and gender-based violence, it is any kind of violence, be it physical violence, be it verbal violence, be it emotional violence, be it psychological violence that is meted upon someone purely on the basis of their gender. So that would be the long definition of it. The shorter version of it would be, if we look at other than rape, other than defilement, other forms of violence that can be classified to be included in what we'd call sexual and gender-based violence would be, as I said, early marriage, or what we call child marriage. We would look at cases of domestic violence, which is quite prominent in Kenya. Would look at even the verbal violence, the psychological torture, the emotional violence that sometimes victims or other survivors are taken through. So the first thing that perhaps, Linda, we need to debunk is the issue that everyone thinks that sexual and gender-based violence is purely just about rape or defilement.
I think that too. We need to debunk that, and then the fact that it just affects women and girls.
Yes. That's the second part. So it's purely meted on you on the basis of your gender. It has nothing to do with the fact that you're a woman or a man.
Okay.
It is any form of violence that is meted on you based on your gender. So it could actually affect either male or female.
Okay. So, Pete, this is a conversation that we've been having for several years. And there is the concern that every single year we keep having this conversation. As a society, where would you say we have failed?
You're absolutely right. We've been having this conversation since, for 16 days every year since 1991. So I think, I worked that out, that's 461 days of activism in my professional career, or beyond, longer than my professional career, actually. I think, you know, there's a role, I mean, in Kenya, there's a role for, the constitution is extremely strong and protects the rights of women and girls and inequality for all in the eyes of the law, and I think that's a really strong starting point. And we can have external actors and external programs and government policies to continue to advance the cause. Ultimately, I think success has to come from within communities, and that's from elders, from religious leaders, and from communities themselves who feel that they can call out violence against women and girls and take action, have the confidence and the security of being able to talk to law enforcement, police, for example, about and report cases of violence against women and girls. And I think it's worth highlighting that that's not just an issue in Kenya or in Africa, that's an issue across the world. And in my own country, in the United Kingdom, last year we launched our violence against women strategy, and where we're actually, you know, we estimate that I think it's about £5.2 trillion is lost every year in providing health services and lost economic output for women and girls in the UK alone. So this is a global issue.
What, Pete? 5 point what?
Sorry, I got my currencies wrong. 5.2 trillion shillings, that is.
Wow, okay.
Has lost and that's a considerable, huge impact for an economy. And I think in Kenya, last year, the Commission for Gender and Equality published a report on the figures for Kenya, estimated about 46 billion shillings it costs. So in addition to the moral argument and what is absolutely right and wrong, there's a very strong economic argument too.
And now that you're having a conversation about the economic aspect of it, Pete, I know that the British High Commission has put up a couple of initiatives to address the issue of gender-based violence. Could you talk me through some of the initiatives that the Commission has put in place?
So in the development programs that we work with in partnership in Kenya, we put women and girls at the center of everything that we do, whether that be our health, our education and nutrition programs, whether that be the social protection programs that we run with the government, the Hunger Safety Net program, for instance, which provides cash bi-monthly to the poorest, most vulnerable communities. And that cash goes straight to the women in families. So it's about empowering the women in households. But I think that's one end of it. I think we do the work we do in the British High Commission, and particularly through the aid program, in working with the police to improve the capability of the police to manage and investigations, but particularly the gender-based desks in police stations, so that actually women can feel safe going into a police station reporting violence, and that they know that it will be followed up. And I think that's absolutely critical to this. More broadly across the British High Commission, we work, and across the region, the British Peace Support Team provides support to troops, to the Kenyan troops, AMISOM and others across the region. 17,000 troops have been trained in how to spot the signs of violence against women and to take action. So, I mean, it's not just in terms of pure development, but in security as well, hugely important. So it's something that we take absolutely seriously, because we won't be able to, collectively, in Kenya and in Africa and across the world, we won't be able to tackle poverty unless we can end violence against women.
Okay, so all these initiatives may have been put on the ground, and Ms. Sayo, this is where you come in as well, and you're a lawyer, you've come across most of these cases, and for many analysts, the biggest problem and the reason why we keep having this conversation year in, year out, is because there's a, quote-unquote, a culture of silence. Could you talk to me about the culture of silence, and why, as a society, we're at a point where women, girls, the entire society just doesn't talk about it?
Definitely. Can I take this on, Linda?
Yes.
The culture of silence, if we are to talk about it, is perpetuated for various reasons. Perhaps allow me to put this in the context of an example. I have, in the organization that we work in, worked with young girls aged between 5 years to 17 years who are being sexually violated in the home state. And that means that the perpetrator is someone who is known to the survivor. The perpetrator is of an age whereby the power relations do not allow her the opportunity to speak out. The opportunities that she has, or perhaps the fact that she is in an institution whereby it's a teacher who is violating her, then subsequently means that she does not have that space to open up. Now, in particular, for young girls or for young survivors who are sexually violated in a homestead setting, or where the power relations are such that the child is at the mercy of a teacher, or there's someone who is well known to her who is a perpetrator, then that is where the culture of silence starts from. Now, this has been exacerbated by the institutions that we have, which have unfortunately not created the most conducive environment for victims. Allow me to use that word, and excuse me for using it, victims to report the cases. If we look at the instance of the institution that we have, especially for the police, you find that a lot of times we have read in the newspapers of instances whereby a police officer has re-traumatized a victim by asking the victim, what were you wearing? How come you were in this place at this time? Can you remove your clothes so that we can examine you to verify that indeed you have been raped? Now, where an institution continues to perpetuate the violence, then you create an environment that is not conducive for us to report.
Right, listen, I need to clear something. You've just talked about the police and the fact that they further traumatize some of the quote-unquote victims. But then from where you sit and having worked with some of these victims, I know for a fact that there's a gender desk at probably in a number of the police stations across the country. Are they making any difference whatsoever?
Sadly, I can tell you from a practical perspective, we have not seen the utility of the gender desks as we would have wanted.
Wow.
And this is based on a variety of issues. Number one, we are still lacking in terms of the kind of exposure that we need for the person who is manning the gender desk. So you find that in most instances, it would be preferable to have a female police officer manning the desk because of the nature of the work. Sometimes you'll find that this person is not available. The second thing is the consistent transfers that happen within the police force. So as you know, sexual and gender-based violence issues within the police do not have a specific unit to them. There's no police unit that is set aside for sexual and gender-based violence. And therefore, that means that whoever is manning the desk sometimes may not be the person who necessarily knows everything that needs to be done when a survivor of sexual violence is brought to the station. So these are some of the challenges we've had with the gender desks.
Okay.
There's also the notion that gender desks have sadly been equated to a woman's issue, a woman's affair. So you find that if a girl goes to report, she's easily told, why don't you, this is a women's issue, so just go and report to the gender desk. There's absolutely no privacy where the gender desk is. So sometimes these are some of the weaknesses that we've seen at the police station. The lack of privacy, the lack of sensitivity towards survivors.
Yeah,
and this has perpetuated the culture of not reporting and the silence that we need to break.
Wow. Okay, so this would be a good place to bring in Florence Machio from Equality Now. Ms. Machio, good evening. We're glad you could make it finally, get through the traffic. Thank you for joining us on Bottomline Africa. Listen, so now that you're talking about gender-based violence, and we've had a long conversation with the other guests, what are some of the physical and emotional consequences of gender-based violence, especially on the victims?
I've been talking to young girls throughout this year in different African countries, and I can tell you the scars, the emotional scars, the psychological scars live on if they're not dealt with. Currently, what we can look at as the physical scars includes, tears, includes infections with STI and HIV, includes, physical trauma, and that can be dealt with. You can go to hospital and get that. What we don't have is the psychological help for victims and survivors of sexual gender-based violence, which then, unfortunately, you find young people or women living with this for the rest of their lives with nowhere to report. And Tabitha has just talked about, she was talking about the culture of silence, and she mentioned the fact that, you mentioned the fact that there's a gender desk. I'd like to inform Kenyans the fact that we have anti-stock theft unit, yet we don't have one unit to take care of sexual gender-based violence. And so this, for me, is misplaced priority. So as much as I'm talking about...
Will it make a difference if we have that unit?
I think so. I mean, anti-stock theft are equipped to track animals, to search for them when they're lost and all that. I believe if you have a team that just specifically investigates sexual gender-based violence, then they are dedicated to only that, then we'll have more prosecutions. We'll have more thoroughly done investigations that then bring perpetrators to book. But even as we speak of perpetrators, my biggest worry has always been for the victim. What do we have in place for the victim? We have a law that takes care of the perpetrator in terms of they'll be jailed, they'll stay on my taxpayers' money and eat our food and whatever it is. But there's nothing for the victim who then has to live with a psychological trauma, which I feel needs to be addressed and needs to be addressed like immediately.
So if we had to put things in place for the victims, what would your suggestion be?
I suggest shelters. When I say shelters, I mean the fact that some children that I spoke to, based on the project that I've done, 25 conversations in 25 schools in Africa, tell me that when a child has been abused by the dad, even as you arrest the father, you need to find a place where this child can feel safe and secure. Because again, the community is looking at her and thinking you're the one who's jailed your father, yet forgetting that this same father is the one that has violated the child.
Okay.
So shelter is number one. I believe we should also have a call center that victims can call. That is, it is not just done by NGOs, but it's done by the government. The government taking control and taking responsibility of making sure that we have a one-stop center, we have shelters, we have a telephone number that I can call and get help. And when I say one-stop centers, in Africa we have one beautiful one in South Africa, where when I enter that place, if I've been violated, I'll find a psychologist, I'll find a policeman. That policeman will take the report, and then the psychologist will take care of me, and then the medical practitioner will make sure I get all the medicine I need. And there's even a room for you to shower, because usually victims of sexual violence feel very filthy. So a place for you to shower, a place for you to change, so you feel dignified.
Okay.
So one-stop center for me would make sense.
Okay.
Thank you.
Pete, there is this argument that while you're talking about the culture of silence, men rarely talk about the issue of gender-based violence, and smartly say their role is important in shaping the narrative and holding fellow men accountable for their role in perpetrating gender-based violence. In terms of the role of men in this conversation, what are your thoughts?
I think absolutely we need to ensure and involve men in this conversation. Men are going to be critical to both the kind of cultural norms and challenging it for within their communities and around. So I mean, absolutely critical that men are involved. I think for too long, I think it becomes something that is just is seen as a women's issue. It is a global issue that affects every single one of us. So I think that's absolutely right. I think going back to some of the other points, I think there's certainly a challenge here about how you get that. You're only going to get the confidence of women and girls to go and report, partly if the security functions are working, but if the men in the community are going to support that too, and not, as other guests have suggested, become a blame game. So it's got to have the men in communities supporting, helping give confidence and safety to women to be able to go to report these issues. Absolutely, so I'd agree.
All right, Ms. Sayo, I know we've talked about, Florence has talked about the services that need to be in place. Peter is talking about the role of men in ending the culture of silence. Let's talk about the legal side of it. There is also this argument that probably the punishment for perpetrators of some of this violence probably get away with very lenient sentences. Is that a concern for you? Is that something that probably should change right now?
Sorry, Linda, I didn't get your question. Could you please repeat that?
Yes. There is a concern that some of the perpetrators get away almost with some very lenient sentences with respect to the legal solution. Is that something that should change? And if it has to, what sort of changes would you like to see within the laws that are there to protect the women and the girls out there?
Okay, so if I could just give the context that we have in Kenya currently, there is what we would call a sufficient protection in terms of the violence itself. Okay. So if you look at right from the Constitution, there is the guarantees that we have under Article 27 on equality and non-discrimination. We have, other than the Constitution, we have the Sexual Offences Act, we have the Victims Protection Act, we have the Witness Protection Act, we have the most recent one being the Protection Against Domestic Violence Act. Now, the illusion that has been created, or rather one of the faults that we have with all the laws that we have, is that they only tend to focus on just the punishment, the punitive punishment that is given towards the perpetrator. But combating sexual and gender-based violence, Linda, needs to be a wholesome approach. So one of the things that we need to cure is that there are certain defects that we have identified over the 10 years that the Sexual Offences Act has been in place. Okay. And there was an attempt more recently this year, beginning of this year, by Honorable Florence Mutua, who had introduced in Parliament what was known as the Sexual Offences Amendment Bill.
I remember that.
And this bill was supposed to cure some of the weaknesses that we have seen in the implementation of the Sexual Offences Act. Now, if you would allow me, one of the weaknesses that we have seen over time is the out-of-court negotiations when it comes to sexual violence, whereby perpetrators negotiate with families of the victims, and cases are dropped halfway. Witnesses stop coming to court. The victim, or rather the survivor, stops coming to court. A case gets frustrated, and the office of the DPP is forced to drop the case. And one of the things that we have really attempted to push for is criminalization of these out-of-court negotiations.
Nice.
Some of these negotiations are, sadly to say, perpetuated by religious leaders, elders, chiefs, and people in positions, especially at the community level. So one of the things that we need to have in law and in place is criminalization of the out-of-court settlements. Now, the second thing is what Florence talked about. Can we be able to see a law that mandates the 47 counties to each at least have a safe space that any person who is a survivor of sexual violence can go to?
Yeah, that would be important.
As we sit here, we are struggling to find shelters. And through my experience, everyday experience, it gets to 5 o'clock and I have nowhere to take this 5-year-old girl who has been sexually violated by her father. We have nowhere. We struggle consistently as the people on the ground to find safe spaces to put these girls into. And even when we do, they are extremely temporary spaces that can only harbor them for 2 or 3 days at most.
All right.
So that's the second thing that we need to see in terms of the law reform. And the third thing that we need to see is the impunity, the complacency that we're seeing from institutions that are duty bearers. The police, for me, and the Teacher Service Commission quickly come to mind because there are certain cases that have been done against them. I think most recent case being the CK case against the Commission of Police, the 2012-2013 case, whereby the court held that the police have a duty to perform something known as due diligence when it comes to their role of investigating sexual violence. We have seen a lot of complacency. Even with the Teacher Service Commission, they have beautiful documents, a code of ethics and conduct, the Teacher Service Commission regulations, but there's no monitoring and evaluation that is happening. There's no follow-up that is happening.
Okay.
And what we see is teachers who sexually violate students are merely transferred from one school to the other, and that is the kind of punishment that they have to deal with.
Which is very unfortunate. Okay, so we have between now and December 10th to make sure something changes this year. Something absolutely must change. Even if you have to have this conversation every single day, we will, because this is a fight that we cannot afford to lose. So let's see how it goes from here between now and December 10th. We need to make as much noise as we can to make sure something changes. So as we wrap this conversation up, allow me to begin with you, Florence. What is the way forward in terms of ending gender-based violence in Kenya?
Wow.
Yeah.
I have a basket full.
I know. Give me two.
Quick 2 things.
Yeah.
First one, I don't know whether Tabitha mentioned earlier, because I was not here in the beginning of the program, but we need to start a conversation as Kenyans. We need to start talking. Parents need to start talking. Religious leaders, every person, including the media, is responsible for what is happening. And I'm deeply concerned about what is happening with the children. And in that respect, we're going to have a national dialogue where everybody comes and listens to what children are saying and how we've let them down, so that each one of us commits and says, as a parent, this is what I commit to do. As a teacher, this is what I commit to do. As a policeman, this is what I commit to do. As media, like you said, we want to make more noise, as much noise as possible. So I want that conversation to happen, and it's going to happen on 7th of December. The other thing that needs to happen, the conversations I've done in schools have also included private schools. What I've seen in private schools, especially the affluent ones, is not that these issues are not happening, but there's a mechanism for the child to speak.
Nice.
So if we could just have spaces within schools. I know we are used to the guiding and counseling teacher being the softest teacher in school, but if we could just focus and say, we have a psychologist, a child psychologist, every week coming, either once a week, that the government pays for, that children can come and speak. And I'm particularly interested in the children who are in danger. Because there's one particular story that has not left my mind, a child who was afraid of the father because she saw the father rape the house girl. And nobody said anything. And so she's afraid that now she's turning 17, the father might attempt the same. Okay. So if this child has a safe space to speak, then we could prevent her from being violated in the first place. Okay. So those are my two key things at the moment.
Clearly, we have a very long list.
Yes, I do.
We need to write them somewhere, just to make sure you can present them somewhere.
Yes.
Pete, from an international perspective, where do we go from here? How do we get to a point where we stop having this conversation year in, year out, and basically just sort it out once and for all?
I think we have to keep building accountability, keep focusing on the institutions that are there to protect women and girls, and I think we're keep the conversation, not so that it is not just an open-ended conversation, but keep talking so that we can identify and build safety for women to talk about these issues. I think if you follow the hashtag #MeToo campaign that's sort of rocked the world in the last few weeks.
Yeah, I know. I saw that.
You see, and I'd say I have personal friends who have only recently been able to talk about sexual violence that they've been victims of under the cover of the hashtag #MeToo campaign. So incredible that educated, middle-class young women have only just been able to talk about things that have happened to them in the last 10 years ago. So I think we've got a long way to go in terms of keeping that conversation, people feeling that it is okay and expected to talk about these issues.
Do you think the international community is doing enough?
I think we have to. I mean, it has to happen at all levels. And I think the Lancet Medical Journal did a sort of set of recommendations on this. I think it has to happen at all levels of society. It crosses beyond local, national, regional boundaries. We see that here in Kenya, in the borders between Kenya and Tanzania, for instance, where there are different laws about violence against women. So it has to be a multi-dimensional, it has to involve different countries. So the international community needs to play a part in that, for sure.
All right, so like I said, we will make as much noise as we can. We cannot give up on this conversation. It's too important, and it involves some of the most innocent souls around gender-based violence. So we have been talking to Pete Volz. He's the head of Department for International Development at the British High Commission. Sir, thank you so much for your time. Ms. Tabitha Sawyer, Deputy Executive Director, Kellen, and she's also a lawyer. And we also had Florence Machio. She's from Equality Now. We were expecting Dina Musinda Rezo. She has not been able to make it. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for your time. And let's keep this conversation going. Great, so you're watching Bottomline Africa, and on our images of the day come from Rabat, where music professionals from 85 countries are networking in the Moroccan capital, hoping to forge partnerships and find opportunities to perform at music festivals. Street bands brought traffic to a halt in the Moroccan capital, Rabat. They were taking part in the opening of Visa for Music events. So we've been talking about gender-based violence. If you want to follow this conversation, especially on social media, use the hashtag 16 days. Then you can get the whole conversation that the world is having about gender-based violence. Now, on the bottom line tonight, the scar that is gender-based violence, that world leaders debated and adopted a resolution to set aside 16 days every year to preach against gender-based violence, is testament to the gravity of the menace. According to available data, an estimated 1 in 3 women worldwide has been beaten, coerced into sex, or otherwise abused in her lifetime. Now, although statistics on the prevalence of violence vary, the scale is tremendous, the scope is vast, and the consequences for individuals, families, communities, and countries are devastating. Here in Kenya, National Gender and Equality Commission says gender-based violence is one of the most widespread and socially tolerated forms of human rights violations, cutting across nationality, race, class, ethnicity, and religion. It is a major source of inequality in Kenya today, with profound social and economic impact on families, communities, and the entire nation. It also has serious ramifications on our national security. The term gender-based violence simply refers to violence that targets individuals or groups on the basis of their gender. Hard to imagine, is it? In such a day and age, there is no moral justification to violate a fellow human being. It is a human right violation, a public health challenge, and a barrier to civic, social, political, and economic rights and freedoms. That, ladies and gentlemen, is Bottom Line. Have a good night. I'm Linda Ogutu.